All right, I'm excited to be here with my new friend, Mike Butera. He founded a company called Artiphon, which is an award-winning smart instruments platform that partnered with Warner Music and Snap for cutting-edge AR music experiences. He has a PhD in sound studies, is a former professor, and a thought leader exploring the intersection of technology, culture, and human expression. We met for a conversation a few weeks ago, and immediately we dove way below the surface. We got to like a really interesting conversation that usually takes me, I don't know, 5 to 10 conversations to get to. So I can imagine that the conversation we're going to have here today is going to get kind of philosophical and zoom out to kind of talk about the place that we're in, the intersection of tech and humanity moving forward and AI and all this fun stuff. So really excited to have him on the podcast today. Currently, he's an advisor to emerging tech startups. He's a musician, creative, and today we're going to talk about the future of music. So creativity, technology, community, where it all comes together. So Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Yeah, this is super fun. It's good to chat again.
Absolutely. So to kick things off, maybe for anyone who this is their first time meeting you or connecting with you, could you share just a brief introduction into your story and how you founded Artiphon and kind of found yourself in the place that you're at now?
So I've been basically a lifelong musician, picked up the violin at 8, and then went to college originally for music performance in Nashville, and realized pretty quickly that I was interested in much more than just playing the notes. I got into studios, discovered that that's a lot of fun, producing music, learned more about the music business, and then I actually discovered sort of philosophy, sociology, cultural theory at a sort of meta level with the industry, and got really into that. Went to grad school in Virginia, got a PhD in sound studies, which is kind of the abstraction of talking about the way technology affects how we perceive sound, how we make the world sound the way we want it to, and very theoretical and fun kind of approach, because at that point, I just wanted to be a professor. That was the goal. I wanted to be in universities teaching big theories around music and, playing music on the side. So I went down that path. I was a professor for about 6 years. And then a friend, we were hanging out, and he had been at a tech company. And he said, "Hey, we should start our own product design firm." And the idea just blew me away. I always love products and design and everything, but I don't know, I hadn't considered that before. And as soon as he said it, I was like, okay, that makes sense. So we started this design firm in Nashville called Salt. We helped other companies design products all across the spectrum. We did Bluetooth speakers. We did collaborations with musicians. We helped out with this thing that helped your earpods cable not get knotted, like all kinds of fun little things. But it gave me the confidence and sort of the awareness of how you make things, how things can be designed and manufactured and sold, and et cetera. So in 2011, I then came up with the idea for Artiphon, which the general principle is, can we design musical instruments, interactive musical experiences that actually adapt to people, and where instruments are more than just one thing, they can do all kinds of things. At the time, this is over a dozen years ago, that was still a pretty weird idea. GarageBand had taken on some normalcy. The iPad had just been launched, so the mobile music revolution was barely a kid. And I just felt like this was going to change everything. So yeah, I started Artiphon, and we, over the years, launched multiple instruments, mostly through Kickstarter, actually. So a lot of building up the audience for this idea at a grassroots level. And yeah, it was super fun. We can go into as much detail as you want there, but I had a great time doing that. And then last year, I kind of went off on my own, and now I'm advising other companies and doing some other fun stuff.
That's cool, man. Yeah, I think it's an interesting intersection that you're in between like philosophy and sociology and technology and music. And also, like, I mean, I can imagine like putting your heart and your soul into this company for like 12 years. It must be kind of an interesting year for you right now, sort of like going in this new direction of, in some ways, it's probably like there's a lot of freedom that kind of comes from being able to explore, what happens now. And I think a lot of the topic that we'll talk about during this conversation sort of will come from this place of perspective. And now, like, let's look at the future and what's going to happen.
Yeah, you have to reset a little bit because whether it's a business or even as musicians, you get in a groove and you build up kind of a routine around life, and then if you want to think new things or play new things, you have to figure out how to almost unwind the muscle memory there. So yeah, it's been a fun year for that.
Cool. Yeah, it's sort of like the journey of letting go and discovering what happens moving forward.
Yeah.
Cool. So, speaking of sort of evolution and letting go and transcendence and kind of like facing the future, I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on. Obviously, we're at like a really unique point of history right now. Just within the last 2 years, it's kind of crazy to think that literally it was like what 2 years ago that ChatGPT dropped. Is that right? It was like right around this time, right now, 2 years ago, and just oh my gosh, like the rate of technological innovation has exploded and doesn't seem to be stopping yet in terms of the exponential curve. I'm curious what you think right now. Yeah, a lot of the people who are listening to this right now are independent musicians who are looking at how do I build a business and a career out of my passion and my artwork, my music. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges that we're experiencing right now as like a landscape? And how do you imagine? I mean, we'll start there, and then I would love to explore like where things are going and how we can best overcome those challenges.
That's a good spot. One of the perspective things to consider is that, at least at a theoretical level or a futurist level, what we're going through right now has been talked about for decades at least. It's been over 60 years since people are really talking about AI and its transformative effects. And then you have more recent people like Nick Bostrom and Ray Kurzweil and others who have been pretty accurately predicting how this rate of change was going to go. So for anyone out there who's kind of blown away by it, there are experts who have been studying this and I think are in a really good position to give us context for what's possible. There are utopians and dystopians and all that, but my general view on this is, when you're, like we were talking about, unlearning in a way, you know, a lot of us were brought up in more linear analog, not necessarily literally analog, but in terms of approaching music. For instance, you had to perform it. You had to learn an instrument. You had to choose an instrument. You had to afford to play the instrument. And
Mm.
then you had to learn it and get good enough, or at least confident enough, that you then had something to say. And even then, you're probably psychologically blocked from sharing it. And all of that's changing so quickly that for people who were brought up in that world, this all seems like cheating and shortcuts, and even just music production tools like built into Logic and Ableton seem like, it's not real music. My experience with Artiphon was, especially in the early days, we were making these smart digital instruments that could play any sound. It could be a whole orchestra or all kinds of stuff. And I was doing it in Nashville, which is one of the most conservative musical towns, anywhere. If it's not a telly through a tweed, it's not it's not
Yeah.
a real guitar. But the opportunity to bring so many new people into that, or to change your process and relearn what you can do musically, for me, outweighed pure in traditional mode, which I love personally. I still play acoustic and analog instruments, but it is a major challenge to even just be open to these new forms. So I guess the arc there is knowing that there are kind of rubrics out there or theories, which we can talk about, for understanding why these changes are happening so quickly. And probably the biggest challenge, I think, for people is that muscle memory or that psychological approach to novelty. Because the fact is, unlike the challenges before, which was like, how do you lower noise? How do you get good room tone? How do you afford a great sounding piano? Like those challenges are evaporating. All the stuff we used to talk about that was hard isn't hard anymore. So now the hard thing is probably in our heads.
That's so interesting. Yeah, it sounds like part of one of the biggest challenges that you're speaking to is around like our sense of identity in terms of, if we get really good at doing something and that's a part of, we've worked for decades to like master this skill.
Yeah.
And then there's this technology that makes it easy for anyone to do it. There's a part of our identities that feel lost because it's like, resist that. Because if we feel like that's who we are, I don't know, what came to mind too is just these are some kind of classic analogies I think right now that are being used to describe AI and like as a tool versus replacing people. But back in the day before we had calculators, people could get really good at doing math and they might have math competitions. And now it's like, sort of like the most intelligent, person at doing mental math just wouldn't be able to compete with someone who's just holding a calculator.
Or chess or Go or I mean, every day there's something new, right?
Yeah, I know. I've heard about that one a lot too recently. Is like Go. I've never played Go, but it sounds like that was sort of a landmark historical achievement when AlphaGo, beat the world's best chess or Go player. So I'm curious how you view AI as a tool and this idea or this fear of being replaced by AI. I've heard some interesting like conversations around the concept that AI is like every technology like has done this in that like there's a revolution, it displaces the previous roles, but then we learn how to use the technology as a tool, and ultimately it's not something that replaces us, it just kind of changes the roles, but we use it as a tool. Do you think the same thing's happening with AI, or do you think that there's something fundamentally different with this form of intelligence that might be different than the tools of the past?
Yeah, I think that's one of the fundamental questions here. The most technologies throughout history were supplanting or automating a human process into something, say, mechanized or somewhat autonomous that could kind of live on its own, even if you have to press the button to make it work. It had an internal process that was mimicking something like what humans used to do. The idea with AI, and I think we're seeing that's part of the rate of change right now, is that it is improving itself already. The way that these AI systems are working, they are sort of recursively, they have feedback loops. And so as AI gets better at coding, it's going to get better at coding AIs.
And also the human teams that are using AI to improve the AI too is sort of like it has that same recursive
Oh, we're
effect.
feeding it as fast as we can. And so the idea of scarcity, even capitalism itself relies on scarcity of distribution or resources, all kinds of stuff, labor. Well, a lot of that scarcity is theoretically going away. There are all kinds of other systems in the world, whether social, cultural, political, that mean that that's not going to be instant. But there's also something called the AI effect. And you could probably apply this to many earlier technologies as well. But let's say GPT. Before 2 years ago, we would have said, there's not really a way to talk with AI that, you would know the classic Turing test. And then as soon as we encounter it psychologically, we say, yeah, but that wasn't the real challenge. Even chess and Go and all this stuff, it's like it was so hyped up right before the game. And then the computers won, and we're like, yeah, but it no big deal. Like we'll
But
move
it
on to the
can't
next big
do
challenge.
this yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And so
Mm.
where we're getting to now, when I talk to a lot of people about new AI experiences or, advanced voice mode, for instance, on OpenAI's platform is highly conversational. We could almost include it in this chat and it would be quite natural. But where I'm getting a lot of questions from people now is, well, does AI have emotion? Does it have intention? Can it make art? Does it have originality or incentive or inventiveness? All these ideas that we want to keep human. The question for me, and sort of from a philosophy standpoint, is what does it mean to be say, a musician, a creative person. Because if that's about you expressing yourself, and this gets straight to your question, if the only thing you need to do to be an artist or a musician is to express yourself, AI can never take that away. That could, by definition, only come from you. So I don't think there's any concern if we're defining art in that way that AI could take our place. Now, that's a neat little box of a definition. If we're talking about the scarcity of, say, the next hit single or scarcity of ambient music to fill your living room or scarcity of good mixing and mastering engineers and things like that.
Mm.
A lot of those things we're already seeing AI do quite well to take over in the economy and the marketplace of where humans used to dominate. So I don't think that's straight to your question. That's more of a market question, but they're related if you're trying to make money with music, for instance.
Yeah, 100%. I love this conversation already so much. It's so interesting. It sounds like part of what you're saying is that there's this reduction in scarcity across the board, but the thing that we're truly afraid of, like at our core, is sort of the loss of self. And so, because self, that's not something that could be lost. Therefore, you don't necessarily have to be afraid of that as artists, as long as we're focused on self-expression. And there's like a whole rabbit hole I think we could go down just in terms of like what is self? How do we define self? And that goes into the roles that we're playing, or is there sort of more fundamental? Is it like our soul, or what is the essence of the self that we're expressing? But also, as you're sharing that, one interesting question came up, which is around scarcity and sort of the reduction of scarcity. And I'm curious, in this world that is like approaching rapidly, where human labor becomes less necessary, and we have sort of this reduction of scarcity, and most of our, capitalism, the market sort of relies on supply and demand. And so, if there is no scarcity of all these different things, that means that both like productivity, like an actual like fruits, like the abundance is like immeasurable.
Wow.
But do you think that there is any legitimate scarcity in that post AI world? And if so, like what is the driver of the scarcity? Because that seems like that will sort of drive the market and just like our evolution in general. So like where do you think that scarcity comes into play in a post AI world?
I love that question because at this point, we're talking predictions. We don't know yet. We're not familiar with it yet. The stock markets still behave in a scarce world mindset, and people still go to school and apply for and work at jobs within a world where things are hard to do. And that includes making good music. I mean, you can press a button and make music with AI, but as of yet, we're not seeing that take over the charts. Now, I think we're a day away from that. It's any time.
Mm.
But for the moment, things feel somewhat normal, if easier. I mean, we are seeing a drastic increase in the number of music creators. I think the last stat I saw was in the past year, music creators have grown by 12% in number of people making music. It's amazing, and new technologies are certainly fueling that. And whether it's just your identity or thinking about music as a career, that's both really exciting because it means it's more accessible to people. But from a job market standpoint, not going to sugarcoat it. If you have 12% more people available to do the job, it's harder to get that job. And so I think to predict where the scarcity is going to be, there's a lot of talk right now about how much people should merge with AI, even like if you're going to write an email. When is the moment where most people will only know how to write an email along with an AI writing assistant? I mean, it's already happening, and there'll tipping point there. So the more that we merge with and rely on it, similar to the resurgence of analog film cameras and and other somewhat nostalgic things, there might be a scarce market for purely human generated content. Humans looking for other humans will be a very specific thing once it doesn't become the default that, say, music is made by humans anymore. Saying that, it sure sounds like a niche, because if by definition, if the majority are assuming that music is made with humans plus AI or maybe AI alone, then human made music will be a subset of that. But technically, that I think will always be a scarce resource. I'd love to know what you think about this too, because I've been thinking about this question a lot recently. It's like the primary thing on my mind, and logically, I don't think there are too many things about the process of making music, at least in a traditional sense, that AI won't be able to do. Totally different question if humans want it, but in terms of just raw sort of instrumental capability, we're not seeing those limitations.
It's so much fun to talk about this.
It's scary though. I mean, I'm thinking about people listening, and you and I have both, had at least part of our careers making music and being inspired by whether actually making money on it or the possibility of that. The idea that we're not necessary anymore. That's really scary.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and I think it kind of comes for me. Like what comes to mind is it kind of comes back to that point that you brought up earlier around self-expression, and there are things that like can't be lost, and it'd be silly to like to predict anything with 100% accuracy right now because it's evolving so quickly. But if I had to sort of like put my line in the sand where I'm predicting things are going, I would predict that with the replacement of the necessity of certain labor for basically like the jobs that we don't want to do, like the ones that we don't enjoy. I think those ones will obviously go when it's not required anymore. When we can have like a Tesla Optimus or some sort of robot replacing those, like those it's sort of like obviously that we're not going to do those anymore. And I think that it's going to create a vacuum or a space where there's a lot of soul searching and sort of a loss of identity or meaning, and that might be like a crisis. Like as human, like we're kind of like, who are we and like what are we doing here? And I think there's gonna be a lot of people that turn to art and music and being
Yeah.
like a creator and using these tools to be able to tell stories and share their identities. That is just kind of hard to like fathom right now, like that we'll be able to create. And I also think there'll be digital environments and worlds that we create where we might have like a Neuralink installed where we can just join each other's worlds and experience these different environments.
I'm totally with you. Yeah, we're hitting the point of the conversation where I don't know. I'm thinking of Independence Day or classic movies where it's like the disaster just happened. What are we going to do about it? And so, if we accept that AI is capable, and technology as a whole, like is capable of replacing most things that we could do, I think it was this morning that there's this new study that they're starting to see that people prefer AI generated poetry. Did you see this? It's hilarious. They're doing these blind tests, and people like the AI poetry more. The funniest part about it is they thought that the kind of obtuse language within traditional poets were flaws. They thought that the poets were AI, and that the reason it was so hard to understand it was because AI is not really good at writing. So all this is going to change. The disaster's happening, but what are we going to do about it? And how are we going to step up? And I think you nailed it. We've been in a consumer culture for a century or more, but the economy has been driven by consumer culture for a while now. And I think we could enter into a much more interactive, creative, collaborative culture where so let's say right now you could go to Netflix and type in a prompt and make a movie. What do you want to watch? Like maybe that'll get really boring to have that much freedom to consume. maybe it'll be much more interesting in that world to create, to collaborate than just like feed, you know?
That's super interesting. I mean, there's some some things that I've seen coming out around like video games and AI. Yeah, I used to love playing RPGs and like video games where you're telling stories. You can make choices and there's branching logic. And basically, these games were complex story arcs where you get to choose different decisions and it changes the outcome of the game. And yeah, I'm just imagining like a world where we could have a video game like that where the people aren't pre-scripted in terms of dialogue, but like there's stories and you have more ability to sort of, live in this world. And what this brings me to is sort of this question of simulation theory
Right.
and the idea that the most likely scenario is that we're not in base reality. And so I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that as well. Like, do you think that there's a chance that what we're in right now, like when we think of simulations, we think of things that are like kind of dumb simulations. Like we think it's like fake or artificial or it's not real. Because usually we think of like Microsoft Sam or like something like I am a human. But I'm curious what your thoughts are in terms of like this concept of simulation theory. And is it possible that we're living in some sort of fractal simulation within like another simulation?
Well, philosophers have a hard time defining consciousness itself. We've been talking about it for many centuries
Mm.
explicitly. And every time someone proposes something, it just gets shot down like all the time. So, and yet we do it every day. We have it. We know how it feels. We know the phenomenology of being conscious. I see simulation theory as an extension of that kind of challenge. And I don't know that we're going to solve it, but as a philosopher, I love that game of playing it out and thinking through various theories or testing them to see is there a way through. And it feels like a game. It's like running around Zelda, testing the walls to see where the secret closet is. You know?
It certainly seems like maybe it's unprovable
Mhm.
whether like we're in base reality or if there's like a higher, like a nested thing, but it almost seems guaranteed if there's not some sort of extinction level like event, we're approaching a point where we can create like a nested version of reality below us.
But I think the reason I bring up consciousness is I feel like we're we're doing that. We're experiencing that every night when we dream. And, getting back to music, like the space of music creation when you whether solo or with a group, when you are playing and this is that collaborative theme we were just talking about. When you're in that zone, that is the world. I mean, when you look at brain scans of people playing music, it's taken over the whole deal. And especially if you're getting some sensory motor stuff involved, it's amazing how much of the brain that fills up. So, music is a sort of dream state in a way. And that is a subset of all the other things you could be experiencing in the world. But when you create that, to me, it has a lot of the trademarks of its own reality. And so, making that more immersive, making that more interactive, social, collaborative. I think that's been my goal in my career and as a designer is figuring out what are the user interfaces that match with people's desires, intentions, rather than traditionally it was physics. Traditionally, it was like you need a certain instrument to resonate in a certain way to make sound. We don't have that limitation. So now it gets to, well, what do humans actually want to do? And what user interfaces, like the Chat GPT prompt box, that's a user interface. And that changed the world 2 years ago. What are the new user interfaces, whether AR, VR, or Neuralink and other brain implants that could actually let us fully live within our own constructed simulations and be fully immersed? Plenty of movies have shown us how this is going to feel. Um, so rather than going up and asking, are we the simulation, are we the result of someone else's simulation? To me, it's more because I can't answer that, but it's more interesting to think about how can we create simulations or new realities and live within them. And that's when we get to free ourselves from back to scarcity from a lot of the limitations that the natural world has always had. I do love the natural world though.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, and I feel like it kinda gets at the root of some of the fear, the concern around just, like, artificial intelligence or technology in general, and sort of this tension between what we view as the real world or organic, materials versus, fake or artificial or, simulation, not real. Yeah, I like what you're talking about in terms of, like, dreams and that we're, like how we're dreaming reality. It seems like there's some really interesting connections between just, like, dreams themselves, how they work, and how our minds work, how we create things in general. Maybe that's connected to, like, what we're talking about in terms of how we express ourselves, our identity, like, you're dreaming things into existence.
Well, and think about the musicians that you love to listen to or watch just as people, as humans. A theme, I would think, maybe there are some who I'm thinking of like people who wear motorcycle helmets and things like that. But most of the time, you're able to observe musicians in the flow state, in the zone, or like songwriters. I think a lot of people appreciate that songs were written because of they can tie it to specific things in the artist's life. There's a maybe autobiographical element there, and so there's a story of a real person that's inspiring. And so as a musician, I try to think about if I'm enjoying it, if I'm in my own flow state and I'm making music that I actually like, because I've made a lot of music in my life that it wasn't it wasn't for me, it was for other people, which is great. But for my own music, if I'm making things that I like, then there's much more of a chance, I think, that other people are going to be inspired by that rather than the sort of formulaic. I mean, we've been in, again, this sort of commodified consumer society for a while, and that got us here. But I'm sure hoping the future is filled with more people just finding their own way to be expressive, and then that's attractive, that's magnetic, hopefully more so than prepackaged pop, that nobody necessarily even enjoys making, but it sells. So that probably is still a fragmented or maybe even extremely fragmented market compared to just a few superstars at the top. But I argue that's going to be a really good thing for musicians, for most people.
Cool. So it sounds like what you're saying is that you think that one of the essential things that'll happen in the future is that things will get more interactive in terms of the media. So rather than us watching a movie that has sort of been pre-created for us, like we'll have more of an expression, an interaction of like our own stories kind of molded into these experiences that, is going to be more decentralized probably because of that, but we're going to have a lot more stories that are being shared and more, authentic stories that are closer to the root of who we are. There's a question that we were talking about kind of throughout this conversation around like scarcity and like in this post AI world, like where are like the things that remain scarce or become more scarce because of this technology? And I think that's an interesting question to like to go deeper into because right now that's sort of what drives human evolution, at least in terms of our, like capitalism and the market is sort of like where's the need and where's it the supply not keeping up with the need. Therefore, like we've created a system to monetize, kind of exploit those needs until it's not a challenge anymore. And then like there's new needs that come up, and it's sort of like we've almost created a game of like the human experience to like solve
Yeah.
problems. And so, like, what are the
Create problems too. No, we would just make them up.
yeah, well, certainly, I mean, that's an interesting point. Yeah, like, yeah, if that kind of breaks the system if you're like literally creating problems so then you can solve them, which is
Yeah.
kind of true. But I feel like generally the market in like a free market devoid of corruption, which obviously like is not always the case, it follows the genuine needs of people. And that's what, kind of drives these products evolutions. So I wonder, in like a post AI world where like the needs like we've solved so many of the needs. I think Ray Kurzweil and about halfway through his new
Mm.
book, The Singularity is Near, he talks about this concept of everything becoming an information technology. I wonder if like the biggest point of scarcity moving forward is around. I've heard some people talking about like the information itself, so like the training data, like that
Mhm.
might be sort of like a point where maybe it can like create its own training data and then we can learn from it. So, but that's still like a point of scarcity, and then it's like we can grow as fast as we can create new training data, and so then it's like how do we create as much as possible and then feed it back in? So maybe that's a point of you push on the button and it like it blossoms, like it explodes. Maybe it's just energy itself. Like how well can we harness? Because certainly, like AI takes a lot of energy and electricity, and so like we're having to build bigger power plants than ever before, and we're gonna have to learn how to efficiently process energy better, whether that's like from the sun or maybe nuclear or fission. I mean, I'm talking like way above my pay grade right now. I don't really like fully understand a lot of these concepts, but it does seem like maybe that's like one of those areas where scarcity, like it still maintains like a true, we need to figure out how to align with those resources because we do have a limited amount of compute or a limited amount of energy. So then there still is sort of like a point of scarcity.
This is practical in a different way than we were talking before about scarcity. So, thinking about the scarcity of, say, music production, can it be done? Can I get a good sound? Can I record it? Can I distribute it? Yes, all that stuff is like I'm not seeing scarcity in many of those areas. Now we're talking about the sort of scarcity of resources more generally in the world, but maybe more specifically for the creative process. I think we were talking about the sort of diffusion or distribution of the audience rather than just singular superstars that things are going to go more niche. I do think there will be a major challenge, or maybe it's already here in the streaming world, of asking, and I know you spend most of your day on this, how can you find an audience? Who might care? And I'm really optimistic about this in general, like from a utilitarian perspective. More people in the world are making music, and I think more people are going to be enjoying music. But that is not the traditional model. And for the music industry. And so musicians coming into this market and saying, I want to make it big. I want to be a star. I think we are going to have to change those expectations more fundamentally or maybe existentially. So, we're talking about the sort of instrumental, can you make music? We're talking about the market, can you make money at music? The thing I'm getting obsessed with recently is why? Why do any of this? And if we can focus again on that as musicians or just people who like music, if we can remind ourselves of why this matters at all. I was thinking about this. I had ChatGPT open and I don't know, I had something to do and then it was still open. And I'm just like looking at and I didn't have anything to ask it in that moment. And it was a great feeling. It was like, I don't need this.
Mm.
Because what I'd rather do is take a walk or read a book or do all kinds of other things. And if we get back in touch with the meaning, the why for us that music exists at all, if it's just to fill space with sound and nothing else matters, then I think AI is going to do a great job at that. Personalized to us, all that. But music's always been about more than that. And so reminding ourselves of all those other things that music means to us, I think is going to create new opportunities for interactive media, musicians creating music that isn't the same every time it's played. A lot of experiments with that over the years. Technology, the infrastructure is still catching up with that idea, but I see that going in some really cool areas. And I think even classical composers who have been dead for hundreds of years could have gotten really into that idea because most traditional classical compositions, they played off each other. And it was different every time it was played because it was different people in the concert hall. They were used to that concept. It's only in the last 100 years or so, that 140 years that we think that music is this frozen static object, this commodity. So I think we're going to break out of that in a really healthy way, and that'll create new opportunities for musicians to create interactive experiences for other people. but it's not just going to be you record it once in the studio and you're set for life. I think ideally it's a much more active thing. I think that's great.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I really thought about it like that, and in that it used to be the case that every single time the music was performed, it would evolve and it would change based on the room, based on the meeting of the energy of the room with the performer. And it does seem like a lot of the best performers of all time, like I mean, the Beatles are famous for this, just like perform their music a ton. And back in the day, like before you recorded a song, even like you really workshopped it by performing it over and over and over again, and then like tweaking it, kind of iterating on it through all of those shared experiences and seeing which parts really resonated with the community. So it's interesting to think that we might take a step back towards that and maybe even make it more interactive, from a community standpoint. So there's not like it's a function of all of the people who are there, part of the room, and it's more about co-creation rather than like siloed independent creators.
I mean, recorded music and the packaging of the song or album as an object, a commodity to buy, I think actually disincentivized or discouraged a lot of people from being musical in ways that we used to do. It used to be more common that people would make music together, sing together, play together, and whether you were a musician or not wasn't this hard, defined thing. It was more casual, it was more social. Then we recorded music, and now we compare ourselves to these perfectly produced recordings. And for a lot of people, even musicians, that's just too intimidating. They shut down. It's if you can't get up here, you might as well not even try. And how many people do you meet who just say, "Why I don't have a musical bone in my body. I'm not good at that." It's like, no, you do. You're human. So it might be necessary for us to shake up, or this might be a fortuitous moment in history to shake up that industry around creating static objects and get back to something that's going to be more, I think, more interesting for people, which is music that breathes with you, that responds to you, and instruments or user interfaces that let you encounter the music in a new way, in an embodied way. I mean, there are so many parallels. I'm thinking of Nike and running, where, casual running through the neighborhood wasn't a normal thing all the time. Uh, and it took not just Nike, but it took a sort of movement of casual exercise to normalize it in the mid 20th century. And now people exercise without saying, I'm eventually going to be a pro athlete. That's not the goal. They just want to enjoy the feeling of it right now. And I think being musical could have a lot of that same shift from a pro first industry back to one where people are more active and interactive. That sounds beautiful to me. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It seems like the tools that are coming out right now just sort of make it so that anyone that has a heartbeat and that has a creative mind can create music. And we're still in the early stages of it too. But you can create like music that's a heck of a lot better than my first songs I started recording on like GarageBand.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
someone with zero experience, but that has a great ear for music. A music lover that absolutely loves music could easily create a song that's just much better than I could when I was just getting started with the tools. And honestly, I mean, approaching a point where even like right now, at least if you compare it to like the time to return on like product, right? Like in like 10 seconds, you can generate something that's like really, really good. That maybe we can still beat it right now, but it just takes a lot longer. But then humans using the tool is like kind of you can kind of get the boost of both worlds right now. One thing that I'm curious to get your thoughts on because it seems like you have an interesting perspective as it relates to these interfaces. These interfaces between humans and music. A lot of your background is in you're creating natural interfaces that people can express themselves and turn that into music. And one of my favorite interviews that we've done on the podcast was with Noland Arbaugh, and we released it about a month ago at the time of recording this. And he's the world's first Neuralink patient.
I heard that chat. It was fun.
It was fun. Yeah, I mean, he's awesome, and, so he, quote, unquote, "created a song telepathically using his brain interface." He's paralyzed from the neck down, but he was able to create, in my opinion, a song that's much, much better than my first song was coming out, just using his thoughts. And so I'm curious, that type of technology, that type of interface, do you think that that's where technology is headed? Most people I talk to about Neuralink are like terrified by the idea. Like, there's no way I would ever get one of these things installed. What are your thoughts? Do you think that eventually, like, it'll be like a cell phone or like everyone has one? And do you think in that world, like, how does that affect our sense of identity and self and co creation?
I had an experience this past week that might be part of the way there into something that feels almost mind controlled. There was an update to iPhones that lets you do eye tracking to move a cursor on the screen.
Wow.
This is tech that's been around for a while, you know.
Yeah, I've used it on the Vision Pro, and it's really cool using it, but I didn't know if there was an iPhone thing.
That's where they took the Vision Pro stuff, put it in iOS, and it's in accessibility settings, and it's not perfect. But thinking, our eyes just kind of move. We don't quite have the same motor type thinking with our eyes, and so there's sort of a natural straight into the brain kind of thing.
Eyes are the window into the soul.
Sure, sure. So,
Mhm.
are they the window into your musical soul as well? Maybe. And, the ideal, I think, with an instrument or an interface is that it disappears, it becomes part of your body, a prosthetic in a way. And so, looking at augmented reality in addition to physical interfaces or these different ways of detecting intention and responding to that with these feedback loops, I don't know that we need electrodes implanted to get there. I think that's exciting and inevitable part of our future. But I think a lot of people could experience that right now with smarter interfaces, more adaptive uh, approaches uh, to making music and thinking about the world as full of, you've seen these, you can connect wires to plants and make music by plants and bananas and stuff. There are so many things out there that are just fun, musical Legos, all that kind of stuff. I think embracing all that's really inspiring, even for trained musicians, to get out of the idea that all you do is ever, play the guitar that you learned when you were 10. I think that's inspiring to straight to your point. The future of once that technology gets more mature, sort of brain or intention controlled rather than just motor controlled music. I think what we were saying a few minutes ago about the interactive media versus static media, I think it's going to be that much more obvious that it might feel boring to just passively listen to something when you get used to interacting with it. Once we go there, I don't know that we're going to want to go back to just, I mean, I'm thinking of Clockwork Orange, just being stuck in a world that you have no control over what's happening. I think we're going to expect to have some control even over our idea in the future of what music is. What is a song? Is it something that is the same 3 minutes every time, or is it a space that you enter into and you're part of and is responding to you? I want to live in that world. And I think that will provide new opportunities for musicians to design those interactive spaces that isn't just a one and done deal. An artist could release a song that evolves over time and continually has new elements to explore, and that people, whether they're literally walking around the room or they're just thinking, exploring the song by way of neurons. The book Infinite Jest, huge, crazy novel from the 90s, talks about a technology or a video that is invented that people will not stop watching. It's this crazy story around all that. But the idea of you could be infinitely entertained by media. There, that we might be developing media is exciting and engrossing enough. In Infinite Jest, it's a bit darker than that. I'm a bit more optimistic to say, no, it's going to be human. It's going to be something that we actually co create. That sounds great to me. I'm embracing all that at the same time as I'm not getting rid of any of my traditional instruments. I love them. But I might be building up a more of a museum here than, than the future with guitars and violins and synths and things.
It's fun. Yeah, and it's super interesting. And it sounds like what you're saying is that the interface through which we express ourselves and explore who we are in the future, if we do have, I mean, just like naturally, like intuition and intention is always like kind of the driver of interfaces. Like the point of an interface is to more directly connect your intention with like the end result. And right now, like our interface with technology in the world is like two thumbs, which is sort of like having dial up internet versus extremely high speed internet. Whereas if we actually had a better interface, like our eyes is a big step in the right direction because it's more intuitive. It's more of like a direct interface. But if we did have the ability to like literally just think our intentions, it would really speed up the flow of communication, it's potentially with each other and with technology.
That's actually when I designed Orba, one of Artiphon's instruments. The inspiration was the texting modality that we're really
Mm.
good with our thumbs, and that you could design an interface that celebrates that. And our thumbs, we just have so much dexterity now that we didn't have a couple generations ago. They were much better at handwriting than most people today. But looking at how people actually behave and designing instruments or interfaces for everyday life, I love that stuff. Rather than forcing people into traditional modes just because that's the tradition. I think there's a huge opportunity, like you brought up the Vision Pro, looking at more spatial awareness of our tech and body awareness that doesn't always have to be a thing to hold, but just responding to your own body. What Meta's doing with the armband with Orion and picking up little twitches and nerve signals and interpreting that gets pretty close to the electrodes we're talking about in terms of internal body processing becoming this augmented creativity externally. So yeah, I'm only seeing good things, but like the beginning of the conversation, it's fundamental change. This is not going to be familiar to the world that we grew up in or the industry at that point. And some of the record labels and streaming and all that, some of the industry is catching up with this, but remains to be seen if they can move fast enough to change how people want to experience music itself. I hope that they lead it because we need people to lead this. But right now, I think it's probably up to musicians to figure out what that feels like.
Absolutely. Well, man, this has been a really fun conversation. It's rare that I get to geek out this much and go down a rabbit hole like this. So, Mike, thank you for being on the podcast today. And, certainly everything we're talking about, it's not hard to imagine many of the risks and like the challenges and the fears and concerns, which are extremely valid. It's, especially when it comes to like Neuralink, like, yeah, what could go wrong? Like, having someone like have control to your thoughts and your brain, like there's a lot of real risks and concerns with these technologies, but I feel like it's often under the optimistic side doesn't get its fair share of expression because like pretty much all forms of like mass media that have talked about this technology are about how it is evil and it's going to destroy us and take over. We're going to lose our humanity and go extinct. And so I think it's refreshing to be able to have a conversation like this, kind of explore where things are going with a more optimistic tone as well, while also acknowledging we have to be careful about doing this in the right way.
And adapt to whatever that new economy is. And I think musicians are some of the most adaptive people in the world. We're used to real time pivoting and, jazz and, playing in time. So I think we'll be fine. I think we're good for this.
Yeah, humanity has proven to be pretty resilient in terms of being able to adapt to sweeping changes. Like the fact that 85% of us used to like our whole time thing was just like farming, and now it's like less than 10%. But Mike, it's been great having you on the podcast. I feel like we could continue this conversation for like several hours. So maybe at some point we'll have a chance to do another one. Maybe if you're down here in Orlando, we could have you out here at the in-person studio for a longer conversation. But Mike, thank you again for being on the podcast today. And for anyone here that's listening to this who's interested in connecting with you more and diving deeper into what you're doing right now, could you share the best way to connect?
Yeah, just email me. It's just my name, mikebutera@gmail.com.
Awesome. All right, Mike. Well, maybe the next time we're talking, we'll both have Neuralinks and we can just beam our thoughts into each other's heads and it'll
And
be
we'll have AI dictated externally. That'd be, or just notes. Maybe we'll just make music together.
I'd be down for that. That sounds more fun.
Yeah, cool. That was a great time. Thank you.